They said the billionaire's twins were born blind, that nothing in this world could ever make them see again. For 3 long years, Alexander Smith lived in silence, watching his sons grow up without light, without laughter, without hope. But one quiet afternoon, when the new maid, Amanda, stepped into that lifeless mansion, something strange happened. She saw what no doctor had ever seen, and the truth she was about to uncover would shake the entire house and change their lives forever. The Smith mansion sat on the edge of the hill in Texas, large and beautiful from the outside, but empty inside. Every curtain stayed closed, every hallway stayed quiet. No laughter, no sound of children, only the slow ticking of a clock that no one cared to wind anymore. Inside that house lived Alexander Smith, a billionaire who had everything a man could buy, except peace. His twin sons, James and John, had been born blind. Doctors from every corner of the country came and left with the same answer. Nothing could be done. Their sight would never come. Their eyes were fine, but the brain did not respond to light. Alexander spent millions on hospitals, specialists, even experimental treatments. Nothing changed. So one day, he stopped trying. He built walls, not just of stone, but of silence. The boys turned 3. They never smiled, never called his name, never looked toward his voice. They sat in their cribs with soft gray blankets, their faces still, their hands small and tired. Alexander could not bear it. He stayed in his office most of the day, staring at pictures of a woman who once filled the house with warmth. His wife, Caroline. She died giving birth to the twins. Sometimes at night, he would sit in the nursery doorway, listening to the steady sound of breathing, too afraid to walk closer. It hurt too much. Then one morning, a woman arrived. Her name was Amanda. She came in quietly, wearing a plain uniform, holding a small bag of belongings. She was not there to ask questions. She needed work, and this house needed someone to care for what was left. The manager gave her the instructions. Do not touch the curtains, keep the lights dim, follow the medicine schedule, and never expect a response. She nodded, even though her heart felt heavy. When she first stepped into the nursery, she stopped. The air felt still, almost frozen. Dust floated slowly across the dim room. The twins sat in their small wooden cribs, facing nothing. The walls were painted pale blue, but the color looked dull without sunlight. Amanda looked around. The toys were untouched, the books were new, the rocking horse sat unused in the corner. She whispered softly, "Good morning, James. Good morning, John." No answer. Not even a flinch. She went on with the routine, washing, changing, feeding. Everything was listed in a book by time and detail. Breakfast at 8, bath at 9, eye drops at 10, nap before noon. Every step was mechanical. Yet, as she worked, she could not stop looking at their faces. They were beautiful boys, identical in every way, with soft brown hair and long lashes that rested on still cheeks. They looked peaceful, but not alive. When she lifted James for his bath, she noticed how light he felt, too light for a boy his age. He did not resist or reach for her. He just sat quietly in her arms. She dipped the washcloth in warm water and gently cleaned his face. A small drop of soap slid near his eye, and she quickly wiped it away. But in that split second, his eyelid fluttered. She froze. It could have been nothing, maybe a reflex, but something about it made her stop breathing for a moment. Her hands trembled slightly, but she stayed still, watching him closely. Then she saw it again, the faintest blink. It was so small, anyone else would have missed it. She looked around the room. The curtains were thick, but a small crack of sunlight pushed through near the floor. The light touched the edge of the bathtub. For a second, she thought she saw James's head turn, just a little, toward it. Her chest tightened. Amanda didn't tell anyone. She didn't even trust herself to believe it. She finished the bath slowly, dried the boys, and laid them down in their cribs. That night, when everyone was asleep, she sat on her small bed in the guest room and whispered, "God, if I'm wrong, stop me, but if I'm right, please help me see what's really happening." The next morning, she tried something different. She opened the curtain just an inch, pretending to dust the window. The light slipped in quietly, stretching across the rug and touching John's hand. He blinked, just once, but she saw it clearly. His fingers twitched. Then his head turned a little toward the light. Amanda's heart thumped. It wasn't imagination, it was real. At breakfast, she gave the boys their food and watched as they reached for the spoon, not with sight, but with awareness. She smiled softly and whispered, "You see something, don't you?" The boys stayed quiet, but she felt the air shift. For the first time since she entered that house, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like something was waking up. Later that day, she went to the cabinet for their medicine. Small bottles lined the shelf. She picked one up and read the label. The letters were tiny, but one line caught her eye. May reduce photosensitivity. Not for long-term pediatric use. Her hands grew cold. Why would blind children need medicine that reduced light sensitivity? She stood still for a long time, staring at the label. Her mind began to race. Could this be why they never reacted to light? Were the drops keeping them from seeing? Or was it all in her head? She didn't know. But something deep inside told her to watch more carefully. That night, Amanda sat near the nursery door, watching the twins sleep. Moonlight brushed softly across the floor, touching the corner of their cribs. She noticed James's eyelid twitch again, like his body was remembering something it had forgotten. She covered her mouth to stop herself from gasping. The truth was right there, hidden beneath years of silence. She wrote in her small notebook, "James blinked at light." John turned his head. No one else saw it. Then she closed the book and placed it under her pillow. The next morning, the house was quiet again, but Amanda's eyes saw what others didn't. She knew this silence was not peace. It was fear. Fear that if anyone looked too closely, they might find the truth that no one wanted to face. And in that big, lifeless mansion, a soft whisper began to grow in her heart. What if the twins were never blind at all? The next morning came slow, the sky outside pale gray with clouds hanging over the Texas hills. Amanda woke early, long before anyone else in the mansion. The air was still. The only sound was the old grandfather clock in the hallway. She stood by her small window and looked toward the east, where a faint light was trying to push through the clouds. It reminded her of the small light she saw in the twins' room the day before, the one they seemed to follow. Her thoughts refused to rest. The label on the medicine bottle replayed in her mind again and again. May reduce photosensitivity. That single line would not leave her. She wanted to ask questions, but she knew better. Workers in big houses learned quickly that some questions brought trouble. So instead, she decided to keep watching, quietly, carefully, until she was sure. When she entered the nursery, the air smelled faintly of baby lotion and quiet sadness. James and John were awake, sitting in their cribs, their small hands resting in their laps. The curtains were still closed as always, leaving the room dim and lifeless. Amanda smiled softly and said, "Good morning, little ones." Her voice was gentle, like a prayer. She reached for the curtains and hesitated. The rules said not to touch them, but she remembered what she saw yesterday. That little blink, that small movement toward light. She pulled the fabric slightly to the side, just 2 inches. Sunlight slipped in slowly, landing on the rug between the cribs. It looked like gold dust touching gray air. Amanda watched closely. James moved his head first, then John. Their movements were small, almost invisible, but they turned toward the light. Her throat went dry. She whispered to herself, "You see it, don't you?" She didn't say anything more. She wanted to be sure. After breakfast, she placed a small mirror on the dresser near the window, pretending it was decoration. When the sunlight reached it, it bounced across the wall, forming a soft line that moved as the sun shifted. The twins watched, not with their eyes alone, but with something inside them waking up. John reached out, his hand open, trying to touch what wasn't there. Amanda held her breath, afraid to move, afraid to scare the moment away. Then she heard footsteps behind her. She turned quickly. It was the housekeeper, Mrs. Miller, holding a pile of laundry. Her voice was sharp but tired. "Keep the curtains closed, Amanda. The boys don't need that much light." Amanda nodded quickly, lowering her eyes. "Yes, ma'am," she said quietly. The woman left without another word. When the door shut, Amanda turned back to the twins. The mirror's light still touched the corner of John's crib, and his hand followed it again. That night, Amanda could not sleep. She sat on her bed, reading the small note she had written earlier. "They follow the light." Her heart was heavy with both hope and fear. If she was wrong, she would lose her job. But if she was right, it meant someone had kept these children in darkness on purpose. The next day, she tried something new. She switched the twins' positions in their cribs. She placed James closer to the window and John near the door. When the sun moved higher, the same strip of light stretched across the room. This time, James squinted slightly, his face tightening like something too bright touched him. Amanda felt tears press behind her eyes. She covered her mouth and whispered, "It's real." She went about her duties quietly that day, cleaning the hallway, folding the blankets, keeping her secret close. Alexander did not come downstairs much, only for meals or phone calls. His voice was low, polite, always distant. He spoke like a man half alive. When Amanda passed him in the hall, he barely lifted his eyes. But she noticed the lines on his face, deep and tired, and the wedding ring he still wore, though his wife was gone. At night, Amanda sat in the nursery alone after everyone had gone to bed. She turned off the lamp and opened the curtain a little wider. The moonlight slid across the floor, soft and blue. The twins stirred in their sleep, their eyelids fluttering. James turned his face slightly, and for the first time, Amanda saw a small smile on his lips, faint but there. The next morning, she decided to look deeper into the medicine routine. She opened the cabinet again, her hands shaking slightly. The bottles stood neatly in a row, each labeled with Dr. Robert Hayes' name. She picked one up, turned it under the light, and read again, "May reduce photosensitivity. Not for long-term pediatric use." Then below, in smaller letters, prescribed dosage approved indefinitely. Her stomach twisted. Something was wrong. Blind children didn't need medicine that reduced their sensitivity to light. She wanted to ask the family doctor, but she had no right, no authority. She was just a maid. Later that afternoon, Alexander's voice echoed faintly from the study. He was speaking to someone on the phone. "Yes, Dr. Hayes, the boy's condition is the same. No changes. Yes, continue the same medication, thank you." His tone was tired, like a man repeating words he no longer believed. Amanda froze outside the door, her heart heavy. So it was the same doctor, still giving orders, still keeping the house in darkness. She wanted to speak, to tell Alexander what she had seen, but fear held her back. Would he even listen? Would he think she was crazy? That night, Amanda prayed again. She whispered, "If I'm meant to see the truth, let it show itself." Then she made a brave choice. She would skip the eye drops for one night, just one boy, and watch. She picked James. She held him gently, pretending to follow the routine. She pressed a cool cloth to his forehead, kissed his cheek, and laid him down without the drops. The next morning, she came early, her hands trembling. She opened the curtain just a little. The sunlight reached James first. His eyes moved. Slowly, softly, but real. His hand reached toward the mirror Amanda had placed nearby. She felt tears roll down her cheeks. "You see it," she whispered. "You really see it." Behind her, a sound made her jump. Footsteps, heavy, slow, coming closer. She turned her head slightly and saw him, Alexander Smith, standing at the nursery door, his eyes fixed on the twins. He saw what she saw. The boys were not still. They were following the light. And in that moment, the quiet mansion that had forgotten hope began to breathe again. For the first time in years, Alexander Smith stood frozen at the doorway of his own son's room, unable to speak. The sunlight poured through the half-open curtain, stretching across the nursery floor like a soft golden line. James sat up in his crib, his small hand reaching for the light, and John turned his face toward it, blinking slowly. Amanda stood beside them, still holding the mirror she had used to reflect the light. Her voice was quiet but firm. "They can see it, sir. Not fully, maybe, but something in them responds." Alexander's lips parted, but no sound came. His face was pale, disbelief filling his eyes. "That's not possible," he said finally. "They were born blind. The doctors said—" "I know what they said," Amanda whispered. "But I also know what I've seen." For a moment, the room fell silent again. Alexander took a slow step forward. The twins blinked as he walked into the light, their heads following his shadow. His chest tightened. His heart felt heavy, but alive for the first time in years. "They're looking at me," he said softly. Amanda nodded. "Yes, sir, they are." He lowered himself beside the cribs, his knees stiff, his voice trembling. "James, John," he whispered, his hands resting on the railing. "Do you see that light?" The twins didn't speak, but both boys tilted their faces toward him, blinking again. That tiny movement broke something inside. Alexander, something he didn't know was still there. Tears formed in his eyes, but he blinked them away quickly, afraid to lose control in front of someone else. Amanda waited quietly. She didn't want to interrupt the moment. When he finally stood up, his voice was low, uncertain. "How long have you known?" "I started noticing small things, sir," she replied. "At first, I thought it was my imagination. But I began writing everything down, the way they reacted to light, the times they blinked, how they grew more alert when the curtains were open." She paused, then continued. "I also checked their medicine. The eye drops. They're not for blindness. They reduce light sensitivity. It doesn't make sense, sir." Alexander frowned deeply, confusion mixed with fear. "Are you saying the medicine could be harming them?" Amanda hesitated. "I don't know for sure, but something isn't right. I skipped the drops for one night, just one, and the next morning, James reacted to the light like never before." His jaw tightened. "Dr. Hayes has been their doctor since birth. He said the drops help with comfort, that they prevent strain." "Maybe," Amanda said softly. "But what if they're doing the opposite?" Alexander turned away, his hands on his hips. The truth was heavy, pressing into him like weight he couldn't shake. He had trusted doctors, trusted the system, trusted anyone who promised answers when he was too broken to ask questions. His wife's death had left him weak, and the blindness of his children had sealed his heart shut. Now, standing in this room filled with dust and sunlight, a maid had seen what experts had missed. He rubbed his face slowly, his voice cracking. "You're telling me I've been giving them something that might have kept them from seeing this whole time?" Amanda said nothing. Her silence was answer enough. Later that day, Alexander sat in his study, staring at the bottles Amanda had brought him. Each label carried the same line: "May reduce photosensitivity, not for long-term pediatric use." His hands trembled slightly as he set them down. How could this happen under his own roof? He had spent millions on care, yet never once looked closely at what his sons were taking. He called the clinic. "Dr. Hayes." "It's Alexander Smith," he said, trying to sound calm. "I need you to explain these prescriptions." Dr. Hayes's voice came through the speaker, steady and professional. "Mr. Smith, those medications are standard comfort treatments for children in similar conditions, completely harmless." Alexander frowned. "Then why do they say not for long-term use?" "That's just general labeling," the doctor replied quickly. "You have nothing to worry about. I assure you, everything is being handled properly." Something in the doctor's tone made Alexander uneasy. Too calm, too practiced. "I'll need to see every report and test result again," he said, "and I want them today." "Of course, Mr. Smith," the doctor said. But his tone had changed, slightly less confident now, almost wary. When the call ended, Alexander sat in silence. He didn't trust the man anymore. He remembered Amanda's trembling voice, her quiet bravery as she stood there holding that mirror. She had no reason to lie. That evening, Amanda came to the study. She held her small notebook close to her chest. "Sir," she said gently, "I've been keeping track of everything. The times they respond, the moments they move. I think it's more than just luck." Alexander nodded slowly. "Show me." She placed the notebook on his desk and opened it. Each page was filled with neat handwriting. "Day 1, she read softly. James blinked twice when the light touched his face. Day 2, John followed the mirror reflection. Day 3, both reached toward sunlight when the curtain was opened." Alexander read the words silently. One note caught his eye. "Skipped eye drops for James. Increased response to light." His chest tightened again. "You took a risk doing that," he said quietly. Amanda lowered her head. "I know, sir. But I had to be sure. I couldn't stand by and pretend not to see what was right in front of me." For a long time, he said nothing. He just stared at the pages, then at her. Finally, his voice softened. "Thank you, Amanda. You've done more for my sons in a few weeks than anyone has done in 3 years." Her eyes filled with tears, but she only nodded. "They're special boys, sir. They just needed someone to notice." That night, Alexander didn't go to his office. He went to the nursery. The curtains were half open, and moonlight filled the room. The twins lay side by side, peaceful. He sat down on the floor beside them, his back against the wall. For a long time, he didn't move. He watched their small faces, their faint smiles, the rise and fall of their breathing. Then he whispered softly, "If I failed you, I'm sorry. But I promise I'll make it right." He stayed there until morning. The next day, he called his lawyer, ordered all medical documents, and quietly hired a private investigator to look into Dr. Hayes. He didn't tell Amanda yet, but deep inside, he knew something dark was hidden behind those prescriptions. And as he watched sunlight fill the hallway for the first time in years, Alexander Smith realized something simple but powerful. Sometimes, truth doesn't scream. It waits for the right person to look closely enough to see it. And that person had been a maid. The next morning, the mansion no longer felt the same. Sunlight slipped through every curtain Amanda had quietly opened. The air smelled fresher, as if the house itself had started breathing again. The twins' laughter soft, shy, but real floated faintly down the hallway. For the first time in 3 years, there was life inside those walls. Alexander sat in his study, a stack of papers spread across the table. Reports, prescriptions, receipts, all signed by the same name, Dr. Robert Hayes. Every bottle, every treatment, every test had come from his clinic. The more Alexander read, the more the words blurred before his eyes. Each page carried proof of how blind trust can be more dangerous than blindness itself. Amanda entered quietly, holding a cup of tea. "Sir," she said softly, "you haven't eaten since morning." He looked up, weary but awake. "Amanda, I spent half the night reading. Every one of these documents connects back to the same clinic. I trusted them because they gave me answers I wanted to hear. They told me my boys had no chance, and I believed it because it was easier than hoping." Amanda set the cup down beside him. "Sometimes pain makes people stop looking," she said gently. "But light doesn't leave. It waits." He nodded slowly, his voice breaking. "I want the truth out, no matter what it costs." 2 days later, the private investigator returned with findings that confirmed everything Amanda had suspected. The medicine prescribed for the twins was part of an unapproved research program. The clinic had been quietly running experiments on children, studying reactions to light suppression drugs without proper consent. The goal was to control overstimulation in young patients, but the results caused damage instead of healing. Alexander's hands trembled as he read. He called Dr. Hayes immediately. "You told me these drops were safe," he said. His tone was calm but carried something new strength. On the other end, the doctor's voice cracked. "Mr. Smith, please, everything was done by the book." "By the book?" Alexander repeated quietly. "You took away my son's chance to see. You made them live in darkness, and I paid you to do it." There was a long silence. Then the doctor hung up. That night, Alexander went to the nursery. Amanda was sitting on the floor, playing with the twins. They were tracing shapes on the window where she had pressed colorful letter stickers that spelled their names. James was touching the letter J, and John was pressing his palm on the O. Sunlight from the late evening fell across their faces, soft and golden. Alexander stood watching them, his throat tight. "You were right," he said quietly. Amanda turned her head. "About what, sir?" "Everything," he said. "The medicine, the light, the doctor. It was all wrong." She looked at the twins, and then back at him. "We can fix it now. It's not too late." He nodded. "No," he said, his voice steady now. "Not anymore." The next morning, the story broke. A reporter Alexander trusted wrote an article titled "Born Blind or Made Blind." The headline carried the twins' names and the quiet heroism of the maid who noticed what others ignored. The article didn't use anger. It used truth. It told how Amanda had seen what specialists had missed, how simple care had revealed a hidden crime. Within days, phones began to ring. Reporters, lawyers, parents all wanted to know more. A court date was set. The clinic denied everything at first, but the investigators' files told another story. Secret notes, altered prescriptions, internal messages about extended trials. In court, Amanda stood before the judge. Her uniform was simple, her hands steady. "I am not a doctor," she said, her voice clear. "But I paid attention. I watched how those boys moved when the light touched them. I saw what others refused to see. No child should live in darkness just because no one looked closely enough." The room stayed silent. Her words didn't need volume, they carried truth. Then Alexander took the stand. He looked at the crowd, his eyes filled with regret and resolve. "I believed what they told me," he said softly. "When my wife died, I stopped seeing the world. I let others tell me what was real. But one woman walked into my home and taught me to look again." He turned toward Amanda, who sat quietly at the front row. "She showed me that sometimes the miracle we need is not found in science or wealth, but in the heart of someone who simply cares." When the whistleblower, a young lab worker, came forward, the courtroom gasped. She presented hidden records, secret test results, and internal memos showing that the clinic had been warned months earlier about the effects on children's vision but kept going for profit. The truth was out. The judge ruled firmly. The clinic was shut down, Dr. Hayes lost his license, and an investigation was opened across the entire state. The verdict didn't bring back the lost years, but it brought justice. Back at the mansion, things began to change. Curtains stayed open. The air smelled of flowers from the garden again. James and John grew stronger each day. They laughed more, reached for toys, and followed the light that Amanda always made sure filled their room. One morning, Amanda wrote 3 words on the window with a washable marker: light still wins. James pressed his small hand over the letters, smiling. John giggled and said softly, "Joy." Amanda froze. It was the first word either of them had ever spoken. "What did you say, sweetheart?" she whispered. "Joy," John repeated, touching her hand. Tears filled her eyes. "That's not my name, baby." Behind her, Alexander's voice came from the doorway. "He's not wrong," he said softly. "You brought joy back here." Amanda turned and saw him standing there, no longer the distant man she first met, but a father reborn. He held a small brown book in his hand. "It's a family log," he said quietly. "I want you to write the first page." Amanda opened it and saw the first line already written in his handwriting. James reached for the light. John followed. Amanda saw. She pressed her hand over the words, unable to speak. That evening, they sat together in the sunroom, the one that had stayed closed for years. The twins played near the window, where light moved softly across the floor. Alexander watched them with tears in his eyes. "Do you think they'll ever remember how it felt when it was dark?" he asked. Amanda smiled gently. "Maybe not, sir, but even if they do, they'll know that someone turned the light back on." He looked at her for a long moment, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought I hired a maid. I didn't know I was hiring hope." Amanda lowered her eyes, smiling through tears. "Sometimes hope just wears an apron." The sun dipped low, painting the room with warm colors. James laughed as John reached for the last beam of light touching the window. The house that once lived in silence was now filled with small voices, soft laughter, and peace. Months later, Alexander launched the Second Look Foundation in honor of Amanda and the twins. It helped parents find new opinions for children who were beyond help. The first photo on its website showed the twins tracing letters on the window, sunlight pouring through. And under it was the quote Amanda had once written in her notebook: "You don't need a degree to pay attention, you just need to care enough to look twice." That was how 2 blind boys found light again, and how one maid reminded a billionaire what it truly means to see. Dear viewers, this story reminds us that sometimes the greatest miracles don't come from money, power, or science, but from love that pays attention. Amanda didn't have degrees or wealth, but she had eyes that saw what others ignored. And through her, light returned to a house that had lived too long in darkness. If you were touched by this story, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and what lesson you learned from Amanda and the twins. Do you believe that small acts of care can change lives? Remember to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe so you never miss our next emotional story. Now tell us below. 1. What part of this story moved you the most? 2. Have you ever met someone who helped you see life differently? 3. What does light mean to you after hearing this story? Your answers inspire us to keep creating stories that heal hearts and open eyes.